Hello fellow sim racers and welcome to another episode of Talking Sims. You're watching some random racing footage at the moment because, like the true professional I am, I forgot to record an introduction to this piece. Luckily, today's guest David Perel really doesn't need much of an introduction to you guys, so let's just jump straight into it. So Dave, how are you doing, man? Thanks for joining me.
Chris, thanks so much, man. How's things your side? I know that you've probably been more busy than me, to be honest, producing the amount of content.
It's been fairly busy, and I guess you've had like the tiniest bit of a breather with the season being delayed. But how many racing events have you done? Sim racing events, like over the last 2 months?
Not as many as others. Not as many as, say, Jimmy Broadbent, I suppose, but a fair amount. I tried to stick to one event a week. At the beginning, I was like doing 3 a week, and I just wasn't performing well in any of them because you can't. I mean, there was one Saturday where I did ACC, AC, and then iRacing in the evening, and as you can imagine, it didn't go well. So
yeah, I mean, just you even need just some adjustment time between the sims, even before the prep time and actually like putting effort into building a setup and getting prepared for the race itself. Just the adjustment time's bad enough. So the
adjustment time and also relearning the interface and which buttons are mapped to where.
yeah.
I mean, the worst one was I was racing with Super GT and iRacing, and I didn't realize it, but my push to talk was also controlling the MFD in iRacing. And I set up all the fuel and stuff, and I had to leave to go to an AC event. And it was a 6-hour that Jimmy Broadbent organized at Imola for charity. And we were doing quite well. We'd recovered from quite far back because we had a crash on the first lap. And I set the fuel for him because you can as the sort of third-party engineer, whatever. And then I pressed the radio button to say, okay, Steve, it's all sorted. Catch you later. And then that was just before the car pulled into the pit. And that was it. Didn't refuel. So he's like, mate, it didn't refuel. I was like, what? And I had to leave. So, yeah, that was after that race. I said, okay, one event a week. And also I wanted to manage my sort of energy that I was putting into sim racing because you saw a lot of people get burnt out, remember?
Yeah,
a lot of guys.
Yeah, well, particularly like the real world guys who maybe hadn't done a lot of it before. Just like jumped straight in, realized, hey, this is some fun. I can use this to keep things going and keep fresh, keep
build a Twitch following,
yeah. And wow, just go mad to start with, and then 3 weeks in, some of them are just like, oh, I hate this. I hate sim racing. It's awful.
Yeah. I had the benefit from my side from playing so much Gran Turismo Sport, the FIA stuff and the daily races. I'd learned already what it was like to burn myself out and chasing the views on YouTube. That's a big one, which I refuse to conform to.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's that's a challenge in and of itself. Anyway,
you just got to let it flow, man. Don't worry about those views.
No, for sure.
Don't worry about the being in the algorithm. You can't win that race. It's unbearable.
But you have to try. I have to try.
I know.
It's my main job. It's easy for you to say.
I understand.
Anyway, man, I didn't ask the first question. I was going to skip over it anyway, which is there is a possibility that like a few people in the audience don't know who you are. I normally get everyone to give them a lengthy explanation about who they are, how they got into sim racing, what they do. I think most of the audience will know, but maybe if you could give us the David Perel elevator pitch.
The TLDR. I'm a professional racing driver. I race GT cars mostly in Europe for Ferrari customer teams. I'm not a Ferrari factory driver, but I only race Ferrari GT cars, which is cool. But I started in karting when I was around 15 years old. Had to stop when I was 23 because I ran out of money, like most racing drivers. I was paying for all of it myself at the time. And then focused on my business for 7 years. My brother and I, when we left school, started as a web design business and became like a web tech company, building templates for WordPress and a whole bunch of other CMSs. And then around the age of 30, I'd saved enough money to come back to racing. I'd been doing like one-off karting races each year for the last 3 years prior to that. Literally just one event a year for fun. But I decided to come back and try one more time to become a professional. And that was when I was 30 years old. And yeah, now I am a professional, which is cool. Okay, not this year. No one is a professional this year because no one's getting paid to race. But during that whole time, during that whole period as a racing driving enthusiast, I was playing sim racing. Not as like a full-on sim racer, but using a simulator to be a better real racing driver. And I have a huge passion. I built a website for sim racing when I was in my early 20s called GT Playground, which was centered on Gran Turismo 4 or Gran Turismo 3. I can't quite remember, but it was Gran Turismo 4, definitely. And these last 2 or 3 months have been awesome to finally see other real racing drivers acknowledge the value of sim racing, etc.
Well, I think that is a good place to jump onto sort of the main topic I wanted to discuss today, which is what us lowly plebeian sim racers like myself and the fast guys who are not lowly and plebeian and are way faster than they probably should be. What can people like us take from the real world of motorsport? You obviously spend a lot of time in both camps, and you're doing driver coaching in the sim racing world, which would be a great point to introduce, actually. What is it that, maybe start with the pros, that what can they be taking from the real world motorsport? What are they missing at the moment, maybe?
I have controversial opinions on this stuff. It's mostly centered around the expectations that sim racers have compared to what real racers have had to go through to become professionals. A lot of sim racers don't have to go through that same struggle, if you will. Yes, it's not easy by any question. You have to put in a lot of hours and stuff, but so does a real racing driver. A real racing driver usually has to have a real job as well and still be fast at the racetrack. You live and die by those accidents that you create. Often when you're trying to prove yourself, you have to pay for that damage that you're creating and stuff in real life, which pro sim racers don't necessarily have to do. But all that being said, the last few months I've started to learn how different the disciplines are at the top level. Of course, there's value in a real driver using a simulator to become a better real driver. But when you're trying to win a championship against a pro sim racer, you're talking about it's a different game. Of course, there are massive crossovers. The kind of coaching that I do in a simulator is more associated to the real world of experience that I've gathered and the thinking that's required on how to win a race, how to win an endurance race, etc. But what I would like to see more from the sim races is, and it's obviously not everyone, but a little bit less expectation, what should be owed to you or anything like that. More pursuit of just being the best in your discipline. And then what follows from that would be the career and endorsements and stuff like that, which is what a lot of real racing drivers do. A real racing driver doesn't set out to make money as a racing driver. They just want to race. But because being able to race on a sim is so much easier, the barrier is so much lower, that's no longer your priority. It's how do I make money from my talent is the priority.
And also,
there.
I guess the ladder, the sim racing ladder in the professional sphere isn't as well defined as it is in the motorsport world. There are a certain set of hoops you really have to jump through, at least for most drivers who can't parachute their way in unless they've got a billionaire father or whatever, which can certainly help.
Yeah, which is rare.
Skip some of those rungs, but no, with sim racing, it's not quite as defined structure. So a lot of people, I guess, can end up further up without having to have the same journey as and shared experience as other guys as well.
Yeah, and especially you definitely find some sim racing talent which suits a particular game. Their natural style of driving suits the physics engine of a game, so they shoot right to the top. But they haven't had you need that little bit of character building along the way to become a long-term champion.
There's also an age.
Power.
I think there's also an age thing there as well, in the sense that you do see it in other motorsports where some of the young guys get right to the top really, really quickly, and you see them struggle in certain things that experience would perhaps teach them not to do otherwise. Maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about that a little bit later. Actually, I want to talk about some real world motorsport stuff in a little bit.
Oh, for sure. I can talk about this stuff for.
Well, no, this
for
is
days.
it. This is it. I met you, I think, for the first time at Nürburgring last year at the SRO round.
Was it last year or 2 years ago?
It might be.
It was last year because we discussed the Igor Fraga incident.
Oh, yes,
with,
we did. Yeah. Well, no,
yes,
this is
that's
this
something
is
that I would like to see more. Actually,
yeah.
Is less of this. I like the aggressive style of driving. I get given a hard time in sim racing for it. People call like Dave bombs, Dirty Dave, da da da. But in the real racing world, that's like kind of normal. Like there's a little bit of argy-bargy. I wish that there was a bit more leeway given in sim racing for that kind of racing. But I understand why it isn't, but I do wish it. Yeah, that was one of the things, definitely.
Yeah, it's strange that I'd not really thought about it, but things like track limits and racing standards are enforced much more strictly when there's no money really in terms of car damage, and there's no health or safety on the lines. Whereas in the real world, there's a bit more wiggle room there.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, I was having, not an argument, but I was having a discussion with the Kunos guys the other day saying, why do three track limit warnings result in a drive-through? They're like, that's realistic. I'm like, it's not realistic. Trust me, we're pushing many more track limits at Spa 24 hour before we get a drive-through. But I mean, yeah, it's just one of those things, That's again, it's slowly starting to become more clear to me how different the disciplines are. Because in sim racing, it's about perfection, like lap after lap has to be pixel perfect. And in the real world, there's a bit more dynamics involved, which ultimately leads you to winning a race or becoming a champion.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that I think a lot of sim racing developers get really, really focused on perhaps the physics of, or the interaction between the car and the road, and sometimes with other cars, sometimes not. But you quite often miss out the simulation of the actual racing environment and some of the things that actually lead to this. You do sometimes get the sense that the rules package in particular is a bit of an afterthought that's just sort of bolted on to allow people to actually have a race.
I think it's, but most of the time the ultimate, it's maybe, but I mean, the truth is that we have gotten to this point where sim racing does not necessarily, the formats are like 5% apart, but it's a big enough difference that they're not the same thing anymore. I think, I argue sometimes that developers have placed so much emphasis on the physics that we've lost touch of some certain other things. Like, I think one of the things that was highlighted during this COVID period was that a lot of series were not ready for the prime time. A lot of games were not ready for the prime time. And yes, they had the physics sorted, but that's because all of these simulators are built physics first, online second, rules third. But I think if we want to break into the big time and have the sort of, I don't know, the viewership or something, or exposure that you get from COD or League of Legends or who knows what else, there has to be this equal amount of focus that's placed in physics into the other elements of the game. But that's a matter of resources and stuff. And I think we're only going to see that in this next generation of simulator games, where given this period that we've had with COVID, hopefully now, or I think probably now, there's going to be much more available budget to dedicate not just to physics, but also to the other elements of the game. So let's see.
You've hit on something that I like to talk about quite a lot. I feel I have to remind the viewership sometimes that, hey, the guys that are developing the game that you love and you want new features in and you want new content, or you're complaining about that this problem hasn't been solved, that company might only have like 15 or 20 people working for them.
100%.
It might have 30 or 40. If it's iRacing, it has many, many, many more, which is why things get dealt with in a different way in that organization, because the business model is different. But we're a tiny niche as sim racers.
Yes.
It's gotten a bit bigger, certainly over the last couple of months, as you say, but we're still a really niche hobby, and to expect the kind of feature-rich stuff that racing sims need, and for it to all be polished and working very well out of the gate, is unfortunately unrealistic. I'd love it. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to be the first one to complain when something's wrong, but yeah.
Me
Sorry,
too.
go on.
I bitch and moan like crazy. I mean, and at first it was directed at ACC, and then I played R Factor 2, and then I also complain a lot about iRacing and GT Sports. I have been on the software development side for a very, very long time. I used to make consumer products. One of the products that my brother and I made was used by over 1 million people in the web world. But we had a very small team, and we knew that we had to prioritize certain elements of our resources, which was very small, to much bigger problems than a bug that existed on like a subpage.
Yeah.
And the game developers have to do exactly the same thing, as frustrating as it may be for us. But that's the reality of developing software. If you don't have the scope or the budget to fill in those gaps, you're always going to have those little bugs. And this is also one of the reasons why I think all of our simulator games should be based on a subscription model. I could be wrong. I've never made a game before. But I think that iRacing got that part right. Yes, it's definitely more expensive for us as the consumer, but we have this longevity of iRacing that is incrementally improved upon and stable. And the game that you played 7 years ago is still, underneath it all, the game that you play now. Whereas GT Sports or ACE, ACC, they get replaced every 3 or 4 years, and we have to start from zero, new problems, etc. So I kind of like the evolutionary approach that iRacing take, knowing full well that was only possible because of a subscription model. But I'm a fan of the subscription model to begin with, even though I know it's not cheap at all.
Yeah, I mean, people leery towards the subscription model, not just for iRacing. My professional life was spent in the marketing industry, and when Adobe went over to subscription for Creative Cloud, all anyone talked about for 18 months was whinging about Adobe going subscription based and how expensive. I mean, it's not cheap either way, but
no, it's not cheap. I also have a subscription for them, and it's damn expensive, people.
It is. The reality is, though, iRacing have built a business model that is extremely sustainable and is working for them. So however much we bitch and moan about it, they have a customer base, and those guys are paying. Cool. So, and I'm one of them.
150,000 plus subscribers. And that the cool thing there about that business model is you may lose some subscribers today, but it takes forever for that subscriber base to drop to zero. Whereas if AC release or Kunos release a new game, ACC will lose 70% of the player base, or F1 2019 when it becomes F1 2020.
That's the perfect example of just like I almost tempted to go and open up Steam now just to look at the cliff of the user numbers today where that's happened. It's interesting you mentioned little bugs. So you reminded me of something that happened on day one when ACC, the first beta build, came out. I remember one guy coming on and commenting on one of my videos and on the Kunos forum and on Race Department, and everywhere he could yell about complaining that mouse steering wasn't implemented, steering with your mouse. Well, I mean, I can't imagine that the user base that are playing ACC using a mouse for the steering input device is more than 5 guys around the world. And I felt bad for the guy because that's obviously how he plays his racing sims and he's having a great time. But I just sort of thought, there is no use complaining about that, mate. You are like on the list of 10,000 bugs and issues and complaints or whatever.
Yes.
You are number 9,999 at best.
Think how much time it would take to do the mouse implementation. Kunos would have to pay a developer in their team to do that, or their time. So that means for your mouse implementation, it's costing Kunos 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 euros for that month's of work. And you just buy the game once for 25 euros or 35 euros. So,
I don't think it was early access, so it was even less than that. I think it was
it was 19 euros or so.
Yeah, it was too cheap, far too cheap. Anyway, I think we should I'm going to get the dumb question I've been asking everyone out of the way because it usually brings up some interesting answers. So you've got to listen to this one carefully. If you've ever seen it, there's a classic episode of The Simpsons called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, where Homer is tasked to design a car that's meant for the average American. If you had to,
here we go.
If you had to design a car for the average sim racer, the real world car for the average sim racer, what would it look like?
Oh my God. I'm the wrong person to ask. I have my perfect 3-car garage, and that's all I think about owning one day. Well, it would have to be a rear-wheel drive car. Obviously, it would have to have endless horsepower, so infinite horsepower, powered by
Infinite
a
at
V12.
least. Yeah.
Yeah, a V12 engine of some kind, with an optional package to strap on turbos for the Nissan fans out there. A manual gearbox.
Obviously.
I would say semi-slicks because you have to drive this thing on the road, but it would be the most on the edge, according to legislation's road tires ever. Like 3 grooves on the edge on the sidewall, and 2 seats, one for the driver and the other for the mate that they want to show off to show them how good they are at driving, and tons of screens, so triple screen, and a seating position that's like this, and you can't move the seating position. Yeah, I think that would be it.
No, you see that's the answer. That this is why I asked this question, because people always, to start with, they're a little bit stumped. They're like, well, I've never thought about that because that's a really stupid question. But then
I just need to open the book of memes. That's all I have to do.
Yeah. For me, I think the answer would be obviously no VR, no buy. So you'd have to have a VR headset. Yeah. I mean, the cameras for the VR would probably have to be on.
And is the power steering even a DD2?
Well, of course. Yeah. What else would?
Or is it a SimCube?
You know what you'd need? You'd need an adjustable tyre model as well. So you adjust the feel between,
yes.
Are you leaving the estate
exactly.
and it feels like R-factor 2 because you quite like the slow physics, the feeling in that. But when you get up to a bit of speed, maybe you can, you're in your BMW, go through the iDrive and you select iRacing because you want to live dangerously. And I should stop before I get in any trouble. But yeah, no, always
this
fun.
This is a rabbit hole, mate.
It is. It's always a fun one to explore. I've not had a disappointing answer to that yet. But let's move on. And I mentioned this earlier when we first met. You and I spoke about that Igor Fraga thing.
Here we go. I haven't addressed this on yet.
No. It's not specifically about that.
I don't mind.
What
on
ensued was like a 90-minute conversation where you talked extremely passionately about racecraft. And I think every time I've spoken to you, like as soon as you onto the subject of like racecraft and overtaking and anything like that, it's a case of pull the pin and just let you go. So I do want to talk about those things. So I guess first things first, when the real world racing starts back up, are you going to make more of those onboard sort of story videos that you were doing last year?
Sadly not, because with GT World Challenge, I had it was an agreement between me and the organization to be able to post those videos online. The rules were I couldn't post any incidents. So if there was any contact, I couldn't post that because of YouTube commenters. And I always had to put the GT World Challenge or then Blancpain logos. So they said, yeah, that's cool. And I showed them how many views the videos got and they appreciated that. But unfortunately this year, the contract that I had to race in GT World Challenge has been cancelled because my co-driver got injured. So we can't put the car on the grid. It's his car. So we have to wait for next year for those. And I'm still going to be racing, but in the European Le Mans series, which is obviously not a bad thing. But they are 7,000 million trillion times more strict about onboard footage being published, to the point of, from qualifying onwards, all onboard cameras from the car have to be taken out.
Wow.
You can't have even a GoPro in your pocket or something. So that's super frustrating because I was so looking forward to doing more onboard stories because that's kind of where I started to discover a fan base online.
Yeah.
Prior to that, I didn't have a fan base. So
well, that's why I asked, because those video, I mean, from a sim racer's perspective, I mean, for those that haven't seen them, you're really talking about the thought process. You're talking about you're following a guy for like 9 laps trying to set up the pass. You're watching what he's doing. You're explaining the thought process, and you just never get that. You don't get that watching the Formula One coverage when David Coulthard interviews Lando Norris after the race. You get 20 seconds at best.
Yeah, you get the soundbite.
Yeah, and not always that a useful one either there. So it's I would dearly love if you manage to get the car back on the grid for next year.
I may be able to do. I'm thinking of something. I may be able to share my practice footage, and I'll talk about the race while you watch the practice footage. And I'm thinking of some ideas. I may actually make it like a live stream almost, where the practice footage is playing on the live stream, and I'm talking over it live. But I'll also interact with the comments, the YouTube comments and stuff. It will really help me to answer the most common questions.
Yeah, and I still think there's a lot of value in seeing the practice footage. Obviously, a race is a race, but I mean,
Yeah.
the number of sim racers that just would dearly love to be able to say, "Hey, you took a slightly different line there. Why were you doing that?" Or just those kind of questions. We just don't get to ask them. So it's a unique opportunity for us nerds, anyway. While we're on the subject of racecraft, let's get your take on the Lewis Hamilton Alex Albon incident from the Formula One, because I'd love to. The world seems quite divided.
Yeah,
on it, actually.
The 5-second penalty was probably the correct penalty. In sim racing, that would be a drive-through, which I think is incorrect. But obviously, I don't think Hamilton did it on purpose. I think what happened was, as Albon came across his car, he effectively lost downforce and understeered into Albon. And Albon had so much grip, he was effectively squeezing the line to try and get a straighter run towards Bottas. He thought he kind of got the move done already. It was not Albon's fault by any stretch. I just think it was a racing incident. And I think that, in my opinion, the 5-second penalty was the maximum that should have been handed out, nothing more. I saw some people online saying it was Hamilton did it on purpose. He's steering away from Albon. He's understeering into the car. If he touched the brakes there, he would have actually locked up into him, would have accelerated into him, essentially. Man, it was a shame.
Yeah,
and I would have liked to have seen Albon potentially chase down the win.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
but
I mean,
in there, what a race weekend.
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
For what it's worth, that's I share the same opinion. I think it's really interesting that Hamilton had quite a lot of lock on. He had to delay getting on the power quite a lot compared to Albon, obviously, because he had that much more lock. You could hear just how much later he jumped on the power from the onboard.
Yeah.
So he's really trying everything he can to not understeer into him, which didn't work. Albon, as you say, is he's just got such a good run off around the outside that it's almost like he thought, okay, job done. I'm just lining myself up for the left-hander after that.
A lot of people did that move there, but for some reason in that situation it just didn't work out. I don't know the answer to that. It was just a different point of the racetrack, and Hamilton had serious lock applied. He'd gone way past the scrub radius, or what's it?
Well, this is it. I think sim racers that I discussed it with or saw discussing it seemed to get that. They didn't say, we should have just turned more. But it's really interesting when you go on the real world motorsport forums where people maybe don't have the same sort of understanding.
Any sim racing experience.
Well, this is it. I'm not suggesting that any of us know what we're doing in a real world car, but we do know that when you're at the... We do know that
you
when
get to experience certain situations in sim racing which do translate. That, to me, is where the biggest value lies, is in the racing that you get to do online. Those lessons there are what I take to the real world. I don't take racing lines to the real world, but I do take the racecraft to the real world. It doesn't go backwards. It goes the other way.
Racing lines would be an interesting one, just because how much sim racers abuse the living hell out of track limits in a way that I assume would just destroy cars in reality if you were taking cars like that lap after lap.
Yeah, curb usage, yes, but track limits not so much, because you guys... Well, not you guys, I'm one of them, but the Sims just punish us way too much, the 1Xs and stuff. Drives me nuts, because, the thing is, like, for example, I think at the moment, ACC has the best track modeling, but you still can't take a 488 GT3 on ACC and drive it like you would in real life. There's a massive difference in the finer details in that last half second.
Yeah, and I think, I kind of don't... I made a point on my list of notes writing down, don't keep asking about how close is sim racing.
The crossover. Well, we can talk about it.
I think people have asked you about it a lot, and I think it's one of those things where the answers aren't going to change massively. But it is interesting how it sort of feels to me, as someone that's been involved in sim racing for a long time, the curve is sort of tapering off, and we're getting to a distance away from what a real world feel might be, and we're inching closer to it now, rather than developing a massive rate towards it, which I guess it's just part of how development works. But
the thing is, there's always going to be these exploits in the game. There's always going to be this little thing that you can do which you probably couldn't do in real life. And I also think that, for example, one of the biggest things about sim racing is that there's no consequence to your crash. So you can push the limit, crash, and dial it back slightly until that's the edge. Taking that philosophy and looking at the real world of real racing, the drivers who have the most mileage and have been around the longest tend to do the best. But it's because they have had the most practice in GTs.
Yeah, I guess there's also
sim racing. It's just a condensation of that.
Is there I think there's probably a survivorship bias thing going on with both groups there as well, in the sense
Must
that
be.
The people that stick around longest and keep doing all those things are most successful, but also they're only staying around because they've got a level of success to start with. Because
that's exactly it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, provided obviously you're not crashing but in the real world, experience in GTs and endurance comes ultimately before talent or speed, because the difference between the talented and not talented in the public's perception is 2/10. So what does the team want? A driver is 2/10 quicker, or a driver who's had 10 years experience at a race which rains every time at midnight in a 24-hour,
Yeah, well, this is what I find really interesting about Formula One fans in particular. People that are only fans of Formula One, they'll describe the difference between, say, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Probably a bad example this weekend, or this week. But they'll describe that as the difference between a champion and an also-ran sometimes. And
yes,
as you say,
I have this argument with James all the time. It's James Parker. He's here for the week. It's the same thing. I said, sorry to interject there, Chris, but it's such a big discussion that I have. It's like, he was a failed F1 driver. I'm like, the guy got to F1. I've raced against failed F1 drivers, and they are unbelievably good and unbelievably talented. So to stay in F1, to stay in a top team, you have to be exceptional. No question about it. And I don't think people appreciate that enough. I honestly think because the guy's turning a steering wheel, they think that they can do the same thing, but it's not the case. It's really not.
I think when you start watching other disciplines of racing, particularly ones with, gentleman drivers or pro-am setups and things like that, and you can really see that when the pro driver jumps out of the car, halfway through a sprint race, and the am gets in, and they're going around a second and a half slower or 2 seconds slower, or whatever.
It sparks up to 10 seconds a lap.
You are crazy.
Can be yeah.
Just jump in a GT4 car instead. Topical.
They'll probably be quicker sometimes. I've seen it. People don't appreciate it. Those F1 drivers are on another level.
It's even crazier when you watch a series like Super Trofeo or some of the other one-make series where they're all in the same car. Yeah, there might be some differences in the level of preparation between different cars, but
yeah, for sure.
The pace, the field could be spread out by a minute after lap one.
That's the thing. Until you drive one of these cars and find out how difficult it is to field weight, manage the power and everything, the braking performance, and then when you're still learning that, the pro comes past you and he just pulls away like you can't believe, like I experienced when I arrived when I was 30 as an amateur. I'll never forget the first test I did in GT3s, which was 2 years into my racing. No, sorry, it was the second year into my GT racing. And René Rast came past me and he left me for dead at that first test. And I was just shocked. And he wasn't good enough for F1. Okay, now I've gotten much closer to him. I'm not anyway pretending I'm René Rast, but with time you do manage to get closer because they reach the top of that sort of what's possible with the GT car, and then you just spend time getting closer to that. But like if you look at Marciello, who was not good enough in the eyes of Ferrari to become an F1 driver, and you see the level that he's at, you just think to yourself, how good are those F1 drivers who've managed to hang around?
Well,
they must be exceptional.
He's an interesting case, isn't he? Because I think he dominated F3. Was it Italian F3 he did, or was it European?
I think F3? So, yeah. It was, yeah.
Either way, he was hailed as being, a future Ferrari driver, as you say. And he landed in GP2, it would have been at the time, and didn't really get in the right team.
Wrong team.
Presumably, I guess, ran out of money, which is always the story. If you don't end up at one of the two teams at the front, then you've got very little chance.
You've got to pay.
In GP2, and it's a horrible situation. But I think he's one of the guys that just sort of demonstrates weekend in, weekend out in the various GT things his quality. And you're right, Jesus, if that guy supposedly wasn't good enough to make it to F1. I mean, I know there's only 20 seats there, but what chance does an enthusiastic amateur who ends up making his fortune in YouTube and then decides to go and do a bit of privateer racing later on in life? What chance does he have?
No, for sure. But this is one of the beauties of motorsports is we all have these strongly held opinions about this kind of racing, and whether it's right or not, at least it creates conversation. I mean, my whole life have been completely addicted to reading the news websites, reading the opinion pieces on Autosport, motorsport.com, Sportscar365. That's what makes the sport so interesting. The race at the end of the day and the result is just the culmination of everything that we've been following through the weeks or months prior to that moment. The race itself, even though it's boring to an average consumer, to us, it's like, it matters. Every single lap matters. Why that person was faster than the other guy and the build-up. And, so I enjoyed these debates a lot, even though these days I try and keep quiet about them online because, I mean, the flaming comments is just unbearable. But it's very easy to bait me into one of these conversations because I do actually love it a lot.
Well, no, this is it. As I said, the first time we spoke, you ended up in what felt like a 90-minute long conversation about racecraft. It was really interesting to get your perspective on. But I sort of figured that if I just sort of dropped a bit of bait in there, we'd get it. I mean, I made the mistake of tweeting after the Grand Prix that I didn't think the Albon Hamilton incident was 100% Lewis's fault.
His fault.
I mean, I said it was a racing incident, and I'm anti-penalty. I'm generally pretty anti-penalties for small contacts like that. So,
yeah.
I'm consistent, but wow, I got some pretty aggressive direct messages.
I don't post opinions
people
on that anymore.
No.
I'll say well done to XYZ, but I try my best to not say any opinions about F1 because the Twitter is the worst, especially.
It's fine if it stays in my sort of follower base. I can have conversations with people.
No, as soon as it spreads out,
but as soon as people start retweeting it, which it's great for my reach, I suppose. I don't really care about that too much. But then all the just sort of wider Formula One fans pile in, and you're in trouble then. Anyway, let's move on before I get myself in even more trouble. Let's change the subject a bit. Sim racers, I guess, ask you loads of questions about the crossover between the real world and all of that sort of stuff. But what, and this might be a difficult one, what are the questions that they don't ask that they should be asking, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of that comes across in sim racing. Like the one thing that I get a lot is, why should you coach me if you're slower than me in sim racing? And the biggest thing there that I think that they get wrong is that it's not just about your fastest lap, because that's what a lot of them measure it against. Like if it comes down to a one lap shootout, you're going to beat me most of the time. 99% of the time I lose against sim racers on average speed for the lap. Ultimate speed. But in real racing, we don't always take that approach, especially in endurance racing. It's more about average speed per kilometer, which is a really difficult concept to get across. But I'd need to sit through a coaching session with you to explain what I mean there. And the sim racers don't necessarily appreciate that. That's the value that I think a real racing driver can bring to the mentality of a sim racer. All the coaches who work for Coach Dave Academy, me, Nick Foster, Jordan Pepper, Calvin van der Linde, we don't coach you how to be the fastest at Barcelona in a specific car. We teach you why a hairpin should be taken in this way, why an S-bend should be taken in that way. And I don't get those kind of questions at all from sim racers. Most of the time, it's, haha, we're faster than you. It's just fine. I honestly don't mind that.
We are awful people on our best day.
What do you think the feeling is like through the wheel? Like what wheel settings should I have? What pedal settings should I have? Those things don't really matter, because the feeling I get through the wheel in the Ferrari 488 is different to the one I got in the 458. I mean, even the difference between multiple Ferrari 488s is different. That doesn't really matter so much as, do you have the right feeling for yourself so that you can get the right sense of timing when you drive in these cars? That to me is the main thing.
That I'm gonna steal that phrasing, because that's something I've been trying to communicate for a while. Sim racers love to get into debates about which sim has the best or the most realistic force feedback, and I sort of think it's missing the point. It's like what is the sim telling you what you need to know to be able to drive the car effectively?
That's all that matters, honestly.
And the rest, I guess, is just personal preference. But there you go. I think that pretty much that answers a question I've been wanting to get at for a little while without having asked it, which is always good. So I want to go back to the racecraft thing. Sorry. Do you have a favourite overtaking move of all time?
Do you mean a move that I've done?
Well, either you've done
a move that I do in sim racing.
No, I guess a moment of either yourself or just a classic motorsport moment. Is there something?
I can ask for both.
Yeah. Do something from your own experience and something that you've just sort of looked at and thought, shit, that was brave.
Well, one of the best sequences, and again, I know this is controversial, but up until that moment where Fraga and Haye crashed into each other in Spa 2 years ago, or 1 year ago, sorry. The defensive driving that Igor displayed up until that point was some of the best driving I've ever seen in my life, truly. He had the presence of mind under huge pressure during that World Championship event to let Haye pass on the exit of La Source so he could get the run up Kemmel and into Lecumbe. And to me, that was like one of the biggest challenges in sim racing is to get over the emotional and mental pressure, because that's what you feel when you're sim racing. In real racing, we feel heat, forces, vibrations, a lot of distractions from the fact that we are absolutely jacked on adrenaline and the pressure of losing and stuff. And he had the presence of mind to pull off that kind of strategy, that defensive strategy. I know in the end he misjudged it. I don't think he lifted on purpose for Haye to hit him. That is my key argument. Plus, he started lifting way earlier just to try and get Haye as close as possible. That to me I think about that move all the time, both in the sim world and in the real world.
It's interesting.
I mean,
it's not just having the presence of mind to do it, which is obviously huge thing to be able to do under
skill
pressure
set as well.
At the sort of top of the stage he was at the time, but also the skills to be able to do it, but also the confidence that it's going to work out, the confidence to seed that kind of time.
To take that risk.
Yeah.
To take that risk where with 3 laps to go, you're giving the lead away.
Yeah.
And one of them had the better tire. I think Haye had the better tire, but Fraga knew that it was going to run out of tire life. I mean, it was just amazing risk-reward ratio there that he figured out somehow, and lifted on the exit of La Source was really impressive. And that came from sim racing. It didn't come from the real world. So that was one of my favorite moves that I've seen. In terms of my own moves, I mean, the move that I love doing the most is the whole art of manipulating other cars while you're in straight lines. So a lot of people think that when you're on a straight, you should be flat out. But one of the things that I coach is the straights are there to manipulate the car around you. To the car that you're competing against, you can fool them into doing a move that opens up the door for you at the corner. So you could, if the leading car runs to the inside against the wall and you're getting the run, you can sort of dummy a move to the outside, wait there. They think you've run out of steam, but you're lifting. And then as they cross over, you cut underneath. So that's the kind of move that I practice over and over and over and over in sim racing, so I can do it in the real world. And it works quite a lot. It works more in sim racing because you're racing against people with less experience, or they haven't put as much thought into that. They're mostly thinking about hot lapping as opposed to racecraft. And again, for me, the biggest value in sim racing is the racecraft side. So I experiment a lot there. And also with set pieces, like just when you do a start at the Nürburgring, you go inside, outside, outside, inside through each corner. And then we practice doing the opposite, outside, inside, inside, outside. And you get used to being offline, being that kind of stuff is what I love about sim racing and racecraft. It's the benefit or the opportunity to practice these moves in the same way that you practice taking the perfect racing line through a hairpin. You can practice these overtaking maneuvers in daily racing on GT Sport or the public servers on ACC and iRacing, etc.
It's funny that you mentioned the Nürburgring inside, taking the alternate lines around it, sort of practicing for those kind of overtaking moves through the slightly annoying arena section.
Yeah, I hate that section.
But I realised the other day that I had spent so much time racing against the AI there to capture stuff for videos that I was as confident driving completely on the wrong line because to avoid the bloody AI doing whatever the hell they're doing on lap one. I'd spent so much time offline that I was really confident just driving around the outside of that, and it did sort of fire something, thinking, well, actually, that's not a terrible thing to practice. Interesting.
No, that's where I started practicing it, was with AI. And then you start to realize, okay, well, if I do have to take the outside line in turn 2, for whatever reason, is that a first gear line or a second gear line? Because some people will go through that line and they'll just take the gear that they're used to doing on the perfect apexy line, you know? But when you start to approach a corner in a different way, it requires a different gear. Or it requires a different style of braking, different style of getting on the throttle, different reference points, where you're looking. And I don't think any drivers practice that enough. Of course, there's some guys. Rene Rast, for example, is Mr. Detail. I know he practices that stuff. But, that to me is like, you shouldn't just be practicing how to take the perfect line. You should also be working on some of the other stuff around it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought because, as you say, it's not really something that's spoken about much, and it's certainly not something you see being demonstrated. It's interesting because you can't do that in real life either, really.
No, you don't get that
not
chance.
In the same way, because if you've got 100 laps of testing, great, but you can't spend 100 laps.
You don't
of
get
that.
100 laps of testing. Trust me.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You get 200 kilometers at most.
Well, you're especially
so what is 200
in
kilometers?
GT discipline. You're sharing the car as well, aren't you? So it gets even worse.
Yeah.
So the limited testing time you've got is divided by 3 straight away, isn't it?
In those cases, it's justifiable to try and take the perfect racing line.
Yeah.
But that in sim racing, we have infinite time. So we should be using it not just to take the perfect racing line. And in sim racing especially, we've seen it. We've seen the quality of driving in the mid-pack. The incidents are more extreme than what I've personally seen in pro racing. And a lot of that is from hot lap specialists who want to prove that they're the fastest. And this is a big misconception about racing in general. It's everyone wants to prove they are the fastest. But that's not what will define you as a racing driver, because we've seen lots of people get fastest laps. We've seen lots of people get pole positions. Lots of people take race wins. But very few people who last for years and years and years at the top level. And you don't do that by just focusing on being the fastest. It's all the elements that come around that, all the hard work that sucks and is difficult, that will give you that longevity.
For sure. It's actually one of the strange things. I've actually seen a lot of people really taking to the hot stint functionality in ACC. I didn't think it would be particularly popular to start with, because you've got practice sessions, you can do what you like in that, and you've got hot lap sessions. But actually saying, hey, I'm going to go and complete this 20-minute this 20-minute session as fast as I can. So I've got to do 20 minutes worth or 30 minutes worth of laps.
That's sim racing. Perfection.
But, it's surprising how well sim racers have taken to it. So I think the message is starting to get across, if slowly.
I was going to sneeze there. Say that one again.
I was just saying crazy. It does seem like, even if it's slowly happening, the message about race pace versus hot lapping does seem to be creeping in there. I'd like to see that functionality in more games, actually.
Hot lapping, it existed in Gran Turismo in like this backwards way, because before we had online racing, in Gran Turismo 3 in particular, we used to have this thing called the 9 boards challenge, which was like the 9 top forums in the world would take part in this Gran Turismo challenge where they had I think 10 disciplines. And one of them was, because you couldn't race online against each other, it was post the best 10 lap stint you can at Monaco in a BMW 320i. And if you touched any cars, you had to save the replay. If you touched any cars or any walls, it wouldn't count. So that kind of hot stinting, but it's not yeah, it's the stint, not the hot lapping. It's hot stint mentality existed.
Yeah.
And was one of the things during those 9-board challenges, which I used to race in, or compete in rather, instead of studying. They honestly, it was around that time when I started to genuinely recognize the benefit of using a simulator or game at the time with the remote. I was using a remote to become a better racing driver, because I realized that if I missed an apex on lap 7 in the stint, I wouldn't be P1, because that 10th I lost there, I could not get that 10th back on any other lap. I was already maximizing all those other laps. I couldn't get that 10th back. And that's what I carried into my real racing when I became really good at karting around the age of 23 when I was at the World Finals. I was using the mentality that I'd learned in Gran Turismo 3 and how you had to be much more precise in your driving. And I don't know what happened since then. It's been downhill since then. But it came from there. It came from those hot stints, which is now available in ACC, I think. And I think, does iRacing? Oh, no, iRacing just introduced AI. That was a fairly recent addition, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I quite like racing against the iRacing AI, because they've got different sort of personality profiles and stuff, and yeah, it offers a slightly different flavour of things. Anyway, we are rapidly approaching the end of the time limit here, so I'm going to ask you one of the stupid questions just to round things out, which is which sim racing personality, or actually, we can, since you cross over, you can have real world as well. Which sim racing or real world personality would you least like to be stuck in an elevator with?
What? How could you ask this, Chris?
No one's said you bastard yet, which was sort of the.
That's a surprise.
That's the response I expected. You know, they all say gamer muscle. Like 3 out of 4 people say gamer muscle. I guess it's because he's got a sense of humour.
Least likely to get stuck in an elevator with. Oh my gosh, I have no idea. Honest to God, I have no idea.
James Parker.
I can tell you that.
There you go. That's a good answer, isn't it?
James Parker. Yes, my head of setup and development. Jamesy, I'm so sorry, buddy, but you've been thrown under the bus.
Get out of jail free card. Right, I think we should wrap it up there before I get you into serious trouble.
More trouble.
Thanks, worse, if I actually get you into real trouble, I have to go back and actually edit out bits of the video, which I don't want to have to do. That's work, man.
Yeah, giving you work, buddy.
We're all busy people here. So thank you so much for joining me on the show today, man. It has been an absolute pleasure. So is there anything you want to plug, or where can people find you for the 5% that have stuck to the end and don't know who you are?
There is one thing I want to plug. It's thesimgrid.com.
Oh, yeah.
It's a new league racing website it's starting off as ACC only, but I will definitely expand it out. I want this to become a place where it's easy to find online racing, which is at the moment a black hole. You have to be part of a Discord community which knows a guy, which gets you into another Discord community where you can go race. So I want to just kind of bring that more to the surface and open up the SimGrid to more communities. At the moment, it's just part of the one that we created on Discord. So please come and register there. We're going to have some cool racing. We're going to have hot lapping as well. And it would be cool to have you guys around. I want to do more and more for sim racing as I can. The racing is for free, by the way. You don't have to pay a cent. So that's my plug.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time generously today to talk total sim racing and answer my disastrous questions. It's been a bizarre interview today. I've decided to meander all over the place. I keep jumping back to wanting to ask about racecraft, which is bizarre. Anyway,
again, I'm going to do another hour on racecraft.
Well, this is the problem, and I could certainly keep asking the poorly formatted questions that I quickly threw together today to make this work. So anyway, man, thank you so much for your time, and I guess all that's left to say is thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.